Hi, everybody. This is Kevin again. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. Had some really great guests on lately and recorded 3 episodes at the Congress for New Urbanism in Charlotte in May, and those have come out recently. This podcast will drop on the 4th of July, and I hope everybody had a chance to listen to those. They were all really, really interesting and fun conversations. I think the ones, especially with Allie Quinlan and John Anderson, that were very focused on a lot of practical tools for people who are interested in small scale development and incremental development, however you'd like to call it. Lots and lots of great takeaways from those. And I hope to have many more guests like that on the podcast. Seems like I get a lot of feedback from folks that they really enjoy those episodes and the stories that people have of how they came to do what they're doing. And so we'll definitely do a lot more of that over time. What I want to do today are a couple of things. I wanted to give a little bit of a wrap up of some thoughts from the latest Congress for the New Urbanism gathering, which is called CNU 31. And then also share some thoughts that I relayed in a session that I did on AI, on artificial intelligence, and its impact on the design professions and the impact on cities and people who live in cities, at least as I see it. So I'm going to break this one into 2 parts today. And I hope you enjoy this. As always, send me some feedback, whether you agree, disagree, have comments. I enjoy hearing from people. So please send me your feedback. For those of you who have been around Congress for New Urbanism, you kind of understand the lingo that I talk about here a lot. And you probably know many of the personalities that I've interviewed. For those who are not familiar with it, I don't blame you for not being familiar with it at all. It's a very interesting little niche world that came to be now 31 years ago, and originally really started by architects and designers who were trying to figure out what they could do about making better places in America, making more walkable places, because they realized that there was a development pattern happening in most of our country that they didn't like, they didn't enjoy it, and they wanted to figure out how to learn from the great historical places in our country and from places overseas, and really try to figure out how to design and get built more places like that. And the group who started that has, by every measure, had incredible success with that. And a lot of the ideas that were born out of the new urbanism have become mainstream certainly within the planning and development professions. And a number of things have also started to creep into the mainstream of broader society. And those are things just like it's great to live someplace where you can walk around all the time and to use your body to have active transportation, as it's called now, where you walk and ride a bike, and that doing these things and living in that manner is actually really enjoyable. And it's something that connects with our deep humanity, that we like to get out and use our bodies to move around. And that's a wonderful part of being a human being and living in a city or town. So those have started to resonate. And then there are other things like the rise of the popularity of what we call accessory dwelling units or carriage houses. There are a lot of items like that were really revived as part of the conversations from the new urbanism world and the Congress for New Urbanism. And it's really cool to see how a lot of those have changed over the years and grown and become more widely popular. So that's really cool. And it's one reason that I've been going to these CNU conferences since 1997. CNU 7 was the first one I went to in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I guess I've been around a little bit now. I'm not one of the founders of the organization, but probably in with what we would call a large group of people who kind of came on second generation folks. that were really taken by the people and the ideas and really became regulars. Um, Now, if you know a little bit about this world and you were to say that CNU is a bit of a cult, I probably wouldn't disagree. It certainly has that feel. There's about probably 1,000 to 1,500 people who regularly attend these conferences every year, who seem to be a core base of people that are interested. Many of us getting older, getting grayer, whiter, whatever you want to call it, in our hair or losing hair. So it's definitely, it has that, it starts to really have that feel now of an organization that is aging and and changing in ways that maybe many of us don't like, because that's what happens when an organization based on an idea or a movement matures. And there's a lot of things that happen with an organization that matures, and one of those is as some of the original people who founded it start to either die off or reduce their activity, there become a lot of existential questions about what's the purpose, how does it evolve, does it need to evolve. I've mentioned before here on the podcast, I really enjoy reading the blog Granola Shotgun by my friend Johnny Sanfilippo. Johnny does a great job of talking about that everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's obviously true for our own lives. It's also true for organizations, for institutions. And I would certainly have it as part of the discussion that, the CNU itself, maybe it's at an end. It had a beginning and a middle, and maybe we're at the end with the useful life of that organization. I don't know. I think it's an open question. This year, what was particularly interesting was that it was paired with the Strong Towns National Gathering, which happened the day before the CNU conference itself. And it was fascinating to see the contrast in the energy, the makeup of the people, the topics that were discussed, et cetera. I've been a member of both organizations for quite some time. I really enjoy them. I really enjoy everything going on with Strong Towns. There's clearly a younger energy with Strong Towns at this point in time than there is with CNU. And so if CNU is to continue, I think that's obviously something that has to change. An organization can't sustain itself on people my age and older. We've got to really find a way to train, recruit, and energize the next generation. Or perhaps it just goes away, and it might be totally fine to say, this organization had tremendous impact for a long period of time. Great things, many things were born of it. There's a lot of offshoot organizations that were created. Strong Towns essentially is one of those offshoot organizations from CNU. There are many others: the Incremental Development Alliance, the National Town Builders Association, the Form-Based Code Institute, National Charrette Institute, among others, that have all do really, really great work. But the CNU itself was kind of always the mothership for all of those. And I guess it remains to be seen what happens from here. I obviously have a lot of friends and colleagues that are part of that world, many of whom you've probably heard on this podcast, and more that you will hear. People that I really like, admire, and respect. We talk about these things a lot. I think those of us who've been around for 20 or 30 years or more really ask ourselves a lot of question about, what is next, or if anything is next. And, it's entirely possible that what you see with Strong Towns is Strong Towns might end up being the successor organization to CNU. I could totally see that. I think Chuck and his team do an incredible job running that organization, building that movement. And I think one of the things that I observed, again, just my own thoughts as I saw read the rooms and listened to people talk and visited different sessions, is Strong Towns is definitely much more about the bottom up solutions that ordinary people can do in their own communities, and it's not driven by professionals. So it's not driven by architects and engineers and planners necessarily, even though there are many architects, engineers, and planners who are part of Strong Towns, who love it, who support it, uh, and really want it to succeed. But it's a much more broad based of movement of trying to really connect with just regular citizens and communities around the country. And CNU has really evolved over time to be much more of what you would probably describe as the opposite, sort of a top down organization that is really driven by professionals, often by big, dreamy ideas and plans. Uh, the professionals who are part of it now, many of them have matured to become parts of large organizations or work with large organizations, whether that's in the corporate world or in the governmental world. And so there is much more of the conversation and focus around projects and ideas and philosophies that people pursue in that world. And so you hear a lot more of that dialogue at the CNU than at Strong Towns, when I think Strong Towns is much, much more focused on uh, what people can do, that don't have those backgrounds, that maybe aren't plugged into a big system, but they still really want to improve their communities or their neighborhood or their block, and what individuals can do. So I always say there's a place for both. At this point, it's pretty easy to see that there's a lot more energy with the strong town side of thing. There's a ton of energy around incremental development and small scale development, and people really, really wanting to learn how to do that, how to take steps to do their own projects. And I think that's really cool. I especially enjoy that. I'm at a point in my life where I really love seeing people just kind of do things, and sometimes even without asking permission, but just going ahead and undertaking projects and making things happen, making positive things happen without necessarily having to wait for a grand vision or a grand plan to do it. So it's a fascinating. This was a fascinating experience this year to see kind of the contrast between the two organizations. So who knows where it goes and how they evolve. But this year really would have given somebody new a lot of insight into both worlds. Um, so that's a little bit about, I think CNU itself. CNU as a conference, of course, something called Congress for the New Urbanism is by nature kind of wonky and has a bit of an ivory tower sounding name to it. And the annual conference they actually call a Congress itself, and there's reasons for that I don't really want to bore everybody with. But uh, when you see this group get together every year, it always feels uh, a little bit more like a large think tank getting together than any kind of professional conference. I'm an architect. I've been to architecture conferences, planning conferences, development, et cetera. Lots of things in this world, and there's an incredibly different feel between conferences geared towards a sort of a narrow segment of professionals where people are going there to get continuing education credits, to talk with their colleagues, to get time away from home, to be frank, and to go party with their friends. That's all part of the conference circuit. um, but the CNU has always been different because it's always been so much more about sharing knowledge, learning, and pushing each other, pushing our friends and colleagues to do better, to ask hard questions, to challenge each other. And so when it has worked that way, I have always really, really looked forward to participating and coming back. And I guess it's why I keep going, because I really enjoy that kind of spirit of debate and back and forth. And um, it's less of that now than it used to be. And that, again, that might be the nature of an organization that's been around for 31 years. It's I'm I'm totally willing to accept the argument that as a group of people, um, mature, they tend to converge more on how they see the world and become more like-minded. And there's just um, less of the kind of debate and disagreement. And there's a lot more orthodoxy than what there would have been in the beginning. And I think that's probably true of all movements for change. And I certainly see that within the CNU. There's an awful lot more orthodoxy now and a lot more groupthink than there would have been, 20 or 25 years ago. So it's interesting to kind of watch that evolve over time. A couple other takeaways that I just wanted to share for anybody listening. I think as we talk about ideas on this podcast, especially related to small scale development, as relate to change that we can make in our own communities. Two things that really come to mind, which I'll certainly expand on probably another time, and may bring some guests on to have a back and forth. But one thing I notice an awful lot in the professional world and our discussions around issues is we do have this crazy tendency to focus, enormous amounts of attention on the small problem as opposed to focusing on the big problems. And I think that's because we seem to be in a place right now where it's just, we've almost given up on the big problems. We feel like we can't handle them. Maybe we feel like we have no solutions for them. Maybe they seem too overwhelming. So we obsess about the small problem that gets a lot of attention and is probably very emotional, probably very political and polarizing. And in the meantime, there's this other big problem sitting off by the side that we ignore. And I'll give you one example. And this is something that has frustrated me a lot in my own city, in Kansas City here, but really in most cities around the country. And that is how we tend to adopt the development narratives, especially around housing, that are common in maybe the handful of large coastal markets, and then we adopt those even if they don't really apply very well. So, for example, there's a ton of discussion around housing affordability and gentrification, and I will tell you straight up that gentrification is a word that if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different answers on what it actually means. And I'm not entirely sure we should even be using that word at all in our discussions around change in cities and housing. I don't think it's very helpful. I think it's become very polarized in terms of how people think about it. But for the purposes of just discussion, I'll say we focus an awful lot. You can read just countless articles in every newspaper, magazine, anything on the built environment where people are talking about gentrification. Even here in Kansas City, you'll see just, it's very easy to find articles going over problems with housing affordability and gentrification. So I'm not here to say that's not a problem at all. But in my city, what we really see is the issues related to housing affordability and rising costs and potentially people having to move because of those happens in a very small geographic area, a very narrow slice of our city that probably impacts, let's say charitably, it impacts probably a dozen neighborhoods. On the other hand, we have this really, really big problem where we have very large sections of our city that have been in terminal decline for 70 years. And those are the neighborhoods that to this day, there is still lots of abandonment, vacant lots, vacant houses, buildings still being torn down. And that occupies a vast swath of the geography of my city. And the to me, that's the example of that's the big problem in our city. The big problem is we have these huge areas and hundreds of neighborhoods probably that are in decline and are suffering and have suffered for years and continue to suffer. High crime, terrible disinvestment, um, abandonment, and there's a handful of those that are starting to see some investment and getting better. But we just seem to not want to talk about that very much, because it's just sexier and easier to focus on the handful of neighborhoods that have seen a lot of redevelopment in the last 10 or 20 years, where costs for apartments have gone up dramatically and houses have gone up dramatically. And and so we wring our hands about those, and yet I just rarely see a lot of serious discussion about the other issues. And so I just say that to say that it's indicative of what I see a lot in the discussion around issues in our cities is we seem to want to spend a lot of time talking about the smaller problems that are that that aren't terribly common, and we just don't seem to want to spend a lot of really time and energy talking about the big problems. So that's one takeaway. We'll talk about that more another time. The other thing, and since I guess this is appropriate since this is going to drop on the 4th of July today, but I always come away from the impression, more and more so, that there are just an awful lot of people in our world who just, I guess if I were a therapist, I would say you've got to find a way to get comfortable and love American cities and towns. So I have been a long time critic of what we have done to our cities and towns in the United States. A Google search could probably come up with 100 blog posts I've written that are very critical. I have written before that I absolutely adore a lot of the cities and towns that I encounter in other countries, European countries, South American, Asian, wherever I've had the opportunity to visit. I've written before that the cities in the Netherlands are probably close to an ideal that I would personally enjoy, and I think are amazing cities for raising children. And I feel I wish we had a built environment that was like that in our country. I make no bones about it. I love those kind of places, and I wish that was more common. But it's not. And our cities and our culture is different in this country. And there actually is a lot of really great, there are a lot of great things that we can focus on that are part of our culture and the way we built cities and towns in the United States. And in fact, one of the things that we have a ton of amnesia about, not just in the planning profession, but throughout our society, is that we really did build a lot of amazing cities and towns in this country from the colonial days all the way up through the 1920s. We had remarkable cities that were very walkable, that did have functioning transit systems that were, by the way, privately owned and maintained. We had, biking was actually a big deal in the early decades of the 20th century in American cities and towns. It was a very common way to get around. We had these wonderful functional neighborhoods with small, entrepreneurs everywhere, small neighborhood grocers. You really had local economies. Even in big cities, you had local economies in neighborhoods. And we had so much of that already in this country. We've forgotten that. We've lost a lot of it. And in the in the rush to build the new modern city, starting really in the 1920s, but not really kicking off in mass until after World War II, we forgot all about those traditions which we had in this country. So, one aspect of that is we actually did have lots of remarkable places, and it's not hard to go some places where you can find remnants of that all over the country. You can see it, you can touch it. You There are still places that work, really well. So that's one thing again. But the other thing is, we have a different culture than almost any other country in the world, and a lot of that is based around a middle class culture of property ownership, and uh, it's very different from so many places, and it's a good thing. I will just say flat out, it's a good thing. It is one of the things that has kept our country strong. It creates lots of wealth for individuals and families, and opportunity for people. And I just feel like in our discussions, especially in these conversations at conferences, we've got to, my fellow planners and designers and all, got to find a way to embrace that and love the nature of American cities, love the nature of, how our cities were platted into individual lots and often into single family detached houses. There's obviously an enormous preference for that in our country, and I just don't think it does any good. Some of the language we use, which is really critical of that, and I also think it it tends to make us fall into an area where people are just not going to listen, because we sometimes take this tack where we come out as opposed to things that are very broadly popular with all kinds of people. And so one of the things we'll talk more about over time is I just really feel like as planners, designers, we need to align ourselves with things that are very broadly popular in our society, and then just figure out how do we make the best of it. How do we, what are the tweaks we need to make? What are the changes we need to make here and there, and be comfortable with the notion of, really quality American cities that are different, that are going to be different from cities in other countries. So I know many of you who listen are working every day in that world, and are trying to make changes, as I am. And I think we should all continue to look for ways to make improvements and make incremental progress. But the idea that we're going to have revolutionary change in our society, and all of a sudden, our cities and towns are going to look like European cities and towns, it's not going to happen. And we delude ourselves by thinking it will happen. And it's just not helpful. We need to find a comfort level with what we have, make it the best we can be, and learn to really love that and appreciate that. Because I will tell you that most people outside the planning world already do love and appreciate what we have in terms of how our cities are built, or they just don't even think about it very much. But there's a vast gulf often in the conversations we have at these conferences between what those of us in the professional world seem to really want, and what regular people in our communities really value and want. So we'll talk more about that. All right, I want to pause here and just thank everybody for listening and for following this podcast. If you can, please take a moment to like or share the podcast with a friend. If you have the opportunity to go on whatever platform you listen to and give a review, I'd really appreciate it. Anything that goes on Apple Podcasts, for example, if you go leave a review on there, it just gets a broader audience and more potential distribution for podcasts. Also, just helps me understand what people are enjoying or not enjoying, and how to tailor future episodes. So thanks again for listening, and please share the Messy City podcast with your friends and colleagues. All right, I want to take the last bit of time here to share some thoughts about artificial intelligence, with a hot topic of the day, I guess. And AI is all over the news. You can't escape it. It's virtually everywhere. I guess that's kind of a funny way to talk about it. And it's clearly uh, the next transformative technology that's going to shape our lives. And within just my lifetime, we have already seen a couple of these. It's remarkable to see how technology has changed and how it's impacted our day to day lives. And certainly in my lifetime, starting as a young kid, uh, it was still the TV and radio world, and TV was mostly 3 or 4 channels. So uh, I'm not that old, but it may sound like it. But in terms of technology and information, that really quickly shifted. We had cable TV. We had the rise of different ways to listen to music with CDs, tapes, CDs, and then ultimately digital music. And then the really big transformative technologies, obviously the rise of the internet and how it became such a day-to-day factor in our lives, really starting in the 1990s in a big way. And then later, really kicking off at the end of the 2000s and into the 2010s were smartphones. And both of those have been utterly transformative in uh, the way that we interact, how we live our day-to-day lives, in some cases where we live and how we live. And as I look at the landscape, it sure seems to me like AI is the next of those technologies, and will be just as transformative, if not more so, than smartphones or even the creation of the internet. It's very remarkable. So I started this talk off at CNU. Uh, Again, I just want to share. These are my observations. I am not an expert on AI. I will never claim to be an expert. I listen to people talk about it. I play around with it a little bit. I don't use it every day. I don't use Chat GPT-4 every day. I may, before long. But I am curious as hell as to how this is going to impact our various professions, and especially how we all live in cities and towns, because every technological shift in society has an impact on work and how people make a living, and then where they live and how they live in those places. You can see that throughout American history, in particular, and how big technological shifts have impacted our cities. And it sure seems clear to me that AI is the next one. And as I said, I've played around with it a little bit. It's fascinating to get into the technology, the various versions of it that are available right now, and just instantly create either graphics or text or whatever. So I start by saying, AI, as we talk about it today, is really just a large language model. So it's really just about being able to understand language and text and manipulate it to create outcomes, or at least that's the way I would describe it. And if you're really good at working with language, or if you're good at writing, you're probably going to enjoy AI and get a lot of use out of it. And you don't have to be good at computers. That's what's interesting about it, is that you don't have to have a particular knowledge of computers at all to be good at AI. So there's, really a lot of the first and second generation of use of computers where you had to know the things to really understand how to get a lot out of it. The fascinating thing about AI is you don't. It's really just typing in words and phrases and commands and asking questions and continuing to refine those to get the feedback you want. So, in that regard, it opens up a whole world of outcomes to people who may not have been very good at things. So I used one example. I showed one video in the discussion or the presentation where there's a guy who, like many of these people that there are on YouTube, who teaches people tips and tricks on Photoshop, and he was using the new plugin that Adobe has put in for Photoshop, and having it refine an image, and in a matter of 30 seconds, he was able to get Photoshop to do something that he said usually was a 30-minute tutorial from from previous videos about how to get people to learn how to manipulate images. So what you can see with that is that the as AI gets better and better, and it will get better and better, it's really going to dramatically increase the productivity of individuals who are trying to produce things, whether it's the written word or whether it's graphics or anything else. I also showed another example. We had this kind of fun meeting at work where we were talking about some public spaces we'd like to improve in our part of the city, and we had a little work group put together to discuss it. And there was a woman who brought in something that she created through Bing, the AI that Bing has, Microsoft has. And so she's not a designer, not an architect, but she was able in just a couple of minutes to produce a board, a graphic board that is something that I would usually use as like a display board in a meeting, with a series of images and options on it that looks incredibly professional, that Bing produced. It's amazing. And again, somebody without the professional background of like an urban designer or something like that. And now, what I told people also is, if you looked at the drawings and you tried to analyze what was on there, you would realize pretty quickly that it was almost all technically wrong. So, things were drawn in places where it it wouldn't work. There are lots and lots of flaws in the output, but I'm fully convinced that that output will just get better and better over time, and it's going to be remarkable how much people are going to be able to create within just a few minutes. So I've played with some of these myself, like I said, and there's a lot of different platforms right now for AI. There's an awful lot of companies who are creating platforms. There are many that are specific to architecture, design, and development. And it's not hard to do a quick Google search and find people who are experienced in that world, who are creating companies, and it's kind of become the new gold rush in Silicon Valley. And so it's going to be fascinating to watch this evolve. This is obviously a major technological wave. So what I wanted to talk about were just my thoughts on how this could impact three areas of life. Just one are the actual professions that I work in. The other is how it impacts cities and towns and life in cities and towns. And the last really is just for individuals and what individuals can do about it. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing here today, but I do want to give a little bit of a summary of this. I'm really curious about feedback from listeners. Do you think I'm out to lunch, or do you agree on some of these? I will tell you, I have always enjoyed over the years kind of trying to take a look at the big picture landscape and see where things were going. And I think it's probably something that I've always been really, really good at. It's become kind of a common thing to say, this is my superpower. Well, I don't know that, that's kind of a silly thing for me to say about this, but I'm not some soothsayer in that regard. But I don't think it's terribly hard to look at what trends are happening and imagine how that change could evolve over 10 or 20 years. And that's really what I'm talking about. It's like what the impact is likely to be over the next 10 or 20 years. So when it comes to the professions, um, what you see a lot of is there's a lot of people freaking out about potential job loss due to AI. And I'm here to say there's reason to freak out. Uh, I think there are absolutely going to be millions of jobs destroyed by AI that are white collar jobs, that are done by people who have jobs that are kind of about like checking boxes, filling out forms, routine tasks, low level jobs, especially in a lot of different professions. Within a couple of years, companies are going to learn how to do those tasks with either without humans or with a fraction of the humans that were necessary before. So, one of my benchmarks in thinking about this was thinking about in the world of architecture when AutoCAD came along and replaced manual drafting. I think this is not a bad way to think about it, but for most of the 20th century, drafting for buildings for drawings was all done by hand. It was done by people sitting at desks, and they would draw and they would erase and redraw drawings, and it took a long time. It was very labor intensive. It required a certain skill set. And it was actually also really inflexible. It was kind of hard to redo it if mistakes were made. Well, along comes AutoCAD in the 1990s, and within a decade, all of the hand drafting was basically gone. And what happened was AutoCAD was still a process really of manual drafting. You have a person sitting at a computer who draws on the computer. But now that one person could do the work of several draftspeople. It was easier, faster, uh, tremendously easy to make changes, and it really improved the productivity of architecture and engineering firms. And now instead of maybe 100 draftspeople that you needed to work on a project, you could probably do that with 10 or less people using AutoCAD. And so it's pretty amazing now if you go into offices and you see a major project, like think for example, like a baseball stadium or an airport, and to actually go see how small the team is of people that work on those projects. So those might have been hundreds of people in the past, and it's just very different today. And it's remarkable to see how productive that small team can be. And I think we'll see the same thing with AI. And it's going to be a very similar way for a lot of people. So there's a lot of kind of rote jobs that exist in middle management and entry level white collar jobs. And I'm not to say those jobs won't exist, but all of a sudden now it's just going to need many fewer people. It's going to be so much easier and faster with this technology. It's very plain to see. And one of the reasons I think you see a lot of freak out in the news about this is because for the first time, this is a technology that really threatens the jobs of people in fields like journalism and in PR and in human resources. Where there's a lot of people in those worlds that now the AI will be able to produce content just as good in minutes for stories that might have taken days or hours. So it's not to say those jobs won't exist, but I think there will be far fewer of them over time, and it'll be interesting to see how that moves ahead. But I expect you'll see a lot of negativity about AI because those are the areas that will be impacted. Whereas previously, with a lot of other technological advances, it tended to be more like the blue collar jobs that were eliminated and manufacturing jobs through automation and outsourcing. And now you're going to see that start to enter the white collar world. So that's a fascinating change. Now, it's also true, like every new technology, there will be a lot of new jobs created. And there's, that's just the nature of every major shift. There are a lot of jobs that went away, and there are new ones that are created from people who need to know how to use and manipulate the AI itself. So I'm still just generally of the belief that what you have seen with previous shifts will happen with this too. That there probably won't be a net job loss. It's just going to be different jobs that will impact different people. I think it's also entirely possible that in my world, in the world of architecture and development, that there's a lot of that the AI will learn how to produce construction drawings. It'll certainly very quickly learn how to produce models for development, that three-dimensional models and financial models that will probably revolutionize small scale development. It will really help those entrepreneurs now have access to tools that only larger entities could afford. So I think that'll be a change. But also, I can see a time where, you are just working with the AI and talking to it, and it accesses a data pool and is able to essentially produce construction drawings for you very, very quickly. So this is a big shift. And I think what we'll see within the professions themselves are an incredible amount of benefits related to generating concepts. It's going to be much easier to generate concepts. It's probably bad for architects and architect fees. It's probably bad for a lot of renderers who make a good living drawing colored renderings. But it's probably going to be really good for developers, for clients, and others as a cost savings and time saving mechanism. It's also obviously going to revolutionize student work. Have no idea how that changes things. But I think overall, you probably will see a situation where there's a lot of people who have really good language skills, but not great design or drawing skills, that will all of a sudden be able to produce really great work, really great output. So buckle up. I think it's going to be a bumpy ride in the professions, and I am not envious of anybody who will be wrestling with that over the next few years. It's going to be a big shift. In terms of the built environment and life in cities and towns, I think you just have to kind of look at what's happening with those shifts that I just mentioned, and then it's not hard to extrapolate what is likely to happen as a result in built form. So we have already seen a major shift over the last few years into remote work for a lot of people, and a really a dramatic impact on the office market, especially in really big cities. And that has become habit for a lot of people. Now, I'll talk more about that in a minute. There's a dark side to that too that we need to discuss. But one of the things that I think is likely to happen, that office workforce that used to occupy a lot of downtowns, I don't think is coming back ever. So we had a discussion in Charlotte. I asked the question of the audience, what percentage of the downtown workforce in Charlotte is back to the office? And somebody said it was around 70%. And that's actually better than most cities, which is true. There are many, many cities that are nowhere near back to 70% of their workforce is back full time. Charlotte itself is a major banking center, and so it's interesting that a lot of the big banks have got their people back, but not everybody. And if I use this example, but if you can imagine, you have a business in that downtown that relied on those workers, and now you have a nearly permanent 30% reduction in the population of people who were there, who were part of your customers. That is catastrophic. And we are going to see rolling impacts for the next decade on what has happened with the office market in major downtowns and in suburban office parks. And that will be coupled with the fact that as I try to read the tea leaves, we're going to just need a whole lot less office space, period. Because I think there will be a net loss of white collar jobs over the next decade or two. And so I would say that the era of the commute to downtown for office work is over, and that we probably need to accept that and move on. And this is a major shift, just like when we shifted from a largely agricultural society to an industrial society, and then when we shifted from an industrial society to more of a knowledge and office based society. um, all of society was organized around those shifts. Our education system, our built environment, our politics, our culture was organized around those shifts. This will be a similar shift that has many impacts that it's impossible to predict. Um, but what the hell? I'll try to predict a few anyway. And we have a big question about how public policy will react, how culture will react. But it seems clear to me that the commute to downtown, uh, especially for the office market, that has been indicative of the last, let's say, 70 years of American society is over. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not here to say that's a bad thing. In fact, one of the critiques we've had in our world of planning for many years is that uh, we have this really bizarre system where our downtowns are nearly all highly populated from 9 to 5, and then very quiet afterwards. They're not actually neighborhoods. Um, so some cities have gotten out in front of that and have really worked hard to make those areas into neighborhoods that are a much bigger blend of residential and office space and other entertainment and amenities that people are looking for. But a lot have not made that shift, and it's pretty clear to me now that that shift for cities who didn't make it, it's going to be forced on them, because the office market as we had it in 2019 is not coming back. So that's going to be a major change, and it's going to be a struggle probably for the next couple of decades for cities, especially for those larger coastal cities that have very strong downtown office markets. It will also obviously impact suburban office markets, and I think we don't talk about that as much, but uh, I think you can look for a time when uh, a lot of those suburban office complexes will probably just be permanently abandoned and torn down. In fact, you may see that in major downtown areas as well. We can't. It sounds crazy right now to think that a 50-story office tower in a major city might just be torn down and not replaced, or maybe it's replaced with a 5-story building. That seems unfathomable to anybody today. But just imagine if you were in Detroit in 1950 and you pointed to this factory or that factory, and you said, in 50 years those are going to be gone. Just and the neighborhoods around them decimated and abandoned. People would have thought you were insane to say that, and yet that happened, and it happened in cities all over the country that had major manufacturing and industrial bases. So with automation and outsourcing, really changed the entire, not just the economy, but the built landscape as well. And so I firmly believe you'll see that as we shift away from the 20th century office market. I think it's also interesting to think about how this impacts other areas of business and economy. For the last 20 or 30 years, most cities have pursued an economic development policy around what is called EDS and MEDS. So that's really higher education and biomedical and hospital systems. Uh, it's also pretty clear that AI has a potential to have a major disruptive effect on those industries. And they're already undergoing a lot of change. Higher education, I think enrollment peaked already around 2014 or 2015. It's been in decline ever since. A lot of higher education is shifting to online methods or other approaches. And healthcare is also changing. And certainly one thing that happened during the COVID era was people learned that they could do remote doctor's appointments in healthcare. And I certainly expect that will become more popular over time. And and so I would just give an editorial that I think the era of eds and meds is also done. And not to say again, I'm not saying those are going to go away, but as a major force for economic development in cities, I think that era is probably over. So there's also interesting flip sides to think about. And, with every good thing, there are bad things, or with every technology, there's a good side and a bad side. And there's a lot of different reactions to it. Uh, Also, one area is, we wring our hands a lot today about how invasive technology is in our lives and how attached we are to our phones. Now, just imagine what will happen with this new technology, and AI will absolutely be integrated in every aspect of computer technology at some point. That's just a matter of time. And so I think what we'll see is uh, technology in general is going to be even more invasive in our lives than what it is today. And so what's the reaction to that? What's the psychological reaction? Well, I think most people will just go along with it, and it just becomes part of your life, and you do what you do. But there's probably also a certain segment that just decides they want to opt out of technology altogether. There has, in fact, been the rise of what's called the homesteading movement the last few years, especially a lot of younger people, even going out to rural areas and teaming up with farmers who are wanting to retire and kind of learning the lifestyle and creating intentional communities. I absolutely believe we could see more of that over time, that there are just, a certain percentage of people who want nothing to do with a lifestyle where you're so connected into technology. It'll be a niche, it'll be small, but I could certainly see that happening, and the impacts of that for rural America are pretty fascinating to think about. And the other thing is, with all technology, there's a tug of war. There is always a tug of war between the elements of society that really want power and wealth and dominance, and the elements in society that want decentralization and maximum freedom to do what they want to do. And technology in general has had a tendency to just create more centralization, more wealth in the hands of fewer people. If you look at it over time, you certainly have seen that. That's one of the issues we wrestle with today with the internet. The internet, which was created to be thought to be this great decentralizing mechanism, and now is almost entirely controlled by like five companies. And it'll be interesting again with AI to see what happens and how that progresses, because I believe there will be a tug of war between those forces, like there always is. So, lastly, what does it mean for individuals? A lot of this depends, where you are in your age, what your career. I think for a lot of people who are probably older than me, um, if you're on the back end of your career, maybe it won't impact you that much. You can probably take what you're doing and find a way to write it out to retirement. You might play with it, you might have fun with it, but it's not going to have a major impact. If you're a younger person, you know, uh, get in the platforms and start playing with it now and be an expert. Learn it, learn how to manipulate it, get out ahead of the technology. Also, like I said in the session, um, I remember at some point in 2020 when everybody was really excited about the work from home phenomenon. I did. I think I tweeted this at one point. I'm just like, be careful what you wish for. That if you're in a job where you don't need to be present, if you don't need to interact with humans to do your job, that there's probably a chance technology can displace your job. So, my advice to especially anybody younger, uh, get your butt to the office, make yourself essential, make yourself not replaceable, get to know everybody, network with people. And if you don't do that, I think this technology could be a very rude awakening. I think it's also just a great time to ask yourself, how resilient is your own life? What are your life skills? I think there are a lot of interesting aspects to think about with this. It's very possible that I would say very likely that the sort of things that humans can do and are necessary to do will become more valuable, because we'll have a better technology to do the things that computers are good at and do. And so anything that is done with your hands, uh, anything related to construction, building things, growing things, fixing things, um, those should become more valuable. Cooking, all those sorts of things that are just really difficult to replace with automation or computers or robots. I think is a good time to think about what skill in that world you have, what you would like to have, and how you can make yourself valuable. So, lastly, I would just say not all this is going to happen immediately. The technology revolution that the internet created really started in the 1990s, but it didn't really have deeper impacts on society until about 20 years later. And I think Facebook was created in around 2007 or so. It probably didn't become ubiquitous for almost another decade. Now AI is going to move faster because it is a machine learning tool. It's gonna learn and get there quicker. But there's still aspects of this that probably won't affect a lot of people for another decade. But I do think, especially if you're a younger person, it's wise to get out in front of it and be as knowledgeable as you can be. Don't be afraid of it. Become a master of the technology, or become resilient in other ways that just make you more valuable and perhaps make your life more enjoyable anyway. So that's a few thoughts about AI. There's obviously a lot more. We could probably spend hours talking about it, and maybe I'll have a guest on at some point who is deeply knowledgeable about the subject. But those were some thoughts I had from a more generalist perspective, and looking at how this technology might impact our futures. That's all for today. I hope everybody has a great 4th of July holiday. Thanks for listening to The Messy City. Take care.